Hello everyone and welcome to the 3ds Max Issue 2 Special Edition for the 3D Buzz 3ds Max online class.
Wow, that was a mouthful.
Yeah, that's a lot to get out. As you already know, or most of you should already know, there already is a 3D Buzz Issue 2 VTM over 3ds Max, and we're reshooting this one so that it can stay constant with 3ds Max 5 just for the online class. So just kind of a special bonus to you folks out there who are in the class. My name is Zach Parrish, and most of you already know me from 3D Buzz, just as Zach, and with me tonight is my good friend, Mr. Joel Van Enwick. How's it going, Bingo?
It's going really good. How about you?
Doing great, man. And some of you who already have heard some of his VTMs know that we call Joel Bingo around here all the time, so if while we're recording I refer to Bingo, at least you'll know who I'm talking to. Now, this VTM is going to cover a lot of stuff. We have many different topics we're going to be taking a look at. We're going to be introducing you to animation concepts. We're going to be looking at the curve editor and the dope sheet. We're going to introduce you to cameras and lights, have a look at the material editor, a basic look at rendering, and then building an actual scene. So there's going to be a lot to follow along with, and it should take the skills that you learned in the first module and push them to the next level so that you can actually start to come out with your own completely animated, completely lit, textured, and rendered scenes. And that's when the magic starts to happen.
That's right, when you finally put everything together.
Right, when you take something that was completely in your head a few hours ago, put it all together, make it move, live, breathe, then render it out, and it's actually your own movie. There's just nothing greater.
And life is good.
So the first thing we're going to talk about is animation. Now, animation in 3ds Max, other than dynamic animation, of course, which we're not going to get into in this VTM, is mostly based on keyframes. So what exactly is a keyframe? A keyframe is the recording of a parameter's value at a given time. Essentially, it's like saying maybe just for example, we'll say at the beginning of our animation, a certain parameter's value, perhaps the Z translate, is at 0. At the end of our animation, the Z translate is at 100. And then over the course of our animation, our ball would just go straight up in Z.
So it interpolates between those two keyframes.
Absolutely. Let me go ahead and demonstrate that now. I'm going to go ahead and create a sphere, and let's click Base to Pivot so it pops up right here on my grid. And we'll right-click to end the tool. Now, just kind of ignore how I'm creating these keys. That's not important right now, and we'll go over it a little bit later. But I'll go to the end of my timeline and get out my Move tool and just move this object. And right now, you'll notice I've just created 2 keyframes. Let me get out of Auto Key mode. You can see one keyframe here at frame 0. And if I click all the way back here to 0, you can see our ball comes all the way back to the beginning of the grid, so the edge that we started out on. This is where our X translate, or X position if you will, was calculated at the beginning of the animation. At the end of the animation, it was recorded over here at the other end of the grid. Now, as we scrub through, we get motion. So with 2 simple keyframes, we've got an entire sequence of our ball, or object, character, what have you, crossing the room, for example. So very easy to see how interpolation keyframes can be a very important part when moving objects around in 3D space. Now, let's have a quick look, though, at the time controls down here in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. Now, you might have already seen these. We covered them lightly in the UI section of the first VTM, but let's go ahead and talk about them a little more in depth now. At first, they're going to look a lot like VCR controls. I mean, we've got what looks like rewind, fast forward, play, and believe it or not, they do function almost the exact same way. First, let's just take a look at play. It's just a natural. We hit play, and the animation plays, exactly. It just goes right through. Now, on either end of this, we have the go to start and go to end buttons, and those will take you to the beginning of the animation or to the end of the animation, respectively. Also, next to these, just on the inside here, we have next frame, and you can just barely see motion, but as I click on this over and over, we're going to the next frame over and over. And just down beneath this, you can see the frame indicator field here going up on its own. So, also down here, just a quick note, this will allow you to type in a frame that you would like. So we can go ahead and just click on, let's type in maybe 50. That takes us directly to frame 50. So if we don't want to drag right to it, we know maybe we've got like thousands of frames. And so dragging wouldn't really do us a lot of good because it'd take us a little while to find the exact frame we need. As long as we know where we need to go, we can just type it in, and boom, we're there. Now, just to the left of this, we have the key mode toggle. And if we click this, you'll notice these two buttons on either side of the play button actually change. So what are these doing? If we look at them, they're going to take us now to the respective keyframes, the next keyframe and the previous keyframe. Now my keyframes in this case are only at the beginning and end of the animation, so they're behaving a lot like the go to start and go to end buttons. But if I were to say take this keyframe and drag it back to frame 50 and rewind my animation, now if I activate key mode, you'll notice we're only going
to frame 50.
Exactly.
Between 0 and 50.
Between 0 and 50. So that's how key mode works. And we'll actually have a bit of a deeper look at that here in just a minute. On the other side of this field, we have the time configuration button, which if we click brings up the time configuration dialog. This is where we can change our frame rate to NTSC, PAL, film, or custom frames per second if we'd like to. We can change our time display to frames, SMPTE, which is the Society of Motion Pictures Technical Engineers standard for displaying time, frames and ticks, minutes, seconds and ticks, and so on. I'm just going to leave mine on frames for simplicity right now. We have playback, where we can play back real time, only in the active viewport, which I do recommend leaving this on. If you uncheck this, then all windows will play back at the same time. So let me go ahead and click OK here. And as we play through, you'll notice all of my viewports are playing at the same time.
And if you have a complex animation, that can slow your system down so much.
Absolutely. So for simplicity's sake, or just to keep things nice and fast, you might want to go ahead and leave this on at all times. Also, you have speed, so you can go to double speed, quad speed, half speed, or quarter speed. We'll just leave ours at standard 1 multiplier right now. We have a direction, so we can play back, forward, reverse, or ping pong, where it'll just go forward and then back when it's done. We also have our animation range. Right now, this allows us to change our start and our end time. You'll notice right now it says 0 and 100, and my timeline also says 0 and 100. We can change the length of the animation, so maybe if we're not too worried about when it starts and when it ends, we can just enter in a length for how many frames we need. We have an overall frame count, so 0 to 100 is 101 frames, and so on and so on. Also, we have the rescale time button. Let's say we've already finished our animation, and maybe we did it for the wrong time range. Maybe we had a ball bouncing across our scene, and we did it in 100 frames, but it needed to be 120. We could just click on the rescale time, and it gives you a very similar window as the animation group down here. In fact, it gives you the exact same values, but what this is going to do is take all of the keys that you've placed and rescale them so that they fit your new time range. Then down below this, we have the key steps group, which is going to adjust how the key mode toggle works, which I demonstrated a minute ago. So right now it's using the track bar, which means it will jump between the keys that it finds available in the track bar. If we deselect this, we can make this go between keyframes of selected objects or keyframes of specific current transforms such as position, rotation, and scale. And I'm not going to go too far into that. We're just trying to keep this simple. I did just kind of want to bring it up, though.
Right.
So let's go ahead and cancel out of this. From here, let's take a quick look at the timeline. You've already seen how I've got some keys into my scene. Now, I can take these keys and just click on them and drag them about. You saw me do that a minute ago. How I dragged this all the way back to frame 50, and it kind of scaled my animation and sped it up a little bit. So now, in between 0 and 50, we're crossing the grid as opposed to 100. Let's go ahead and drag this back all the way to where it was. Also, just a quick note, we have our timeline indicator, which is what you've seen me drag back and forth. So, good thing to bring this up. You can just left-click and drag on this, and this is what is called scrubbing. This will just cycle through your animation as you move the mouse. Very good way to refine your animation. You can play it slowly, play it forward, backwards, all just by moving your mouse. So, very handy to do. Just above the timeline in the gray area, you can click to make the timeline indicator jump to, or the time slider, if you will, jump to a specific point on the timeline. So if I come over here to...
if you know a general area, you could just click in that area.
Exactly. If I know I need to come down to frame 10 and I don't want to click and drag because that's a whole lot of work, I can just move over frame 10 and click, and we get right there in the general area. On each side of the time slider, we see these little arrows. Now, these are going to be exactly like the key mode buttons we have here. So right now, these are set to previous and next frame, and indeed, these are doing the exact same thing. And a quick note, as you use these, you don't have to move the mouse. For those of you watching the video right now, you can see my mouse cursor slowly dancing across the screen, and I'm not moving the mouse at all. As I click next, the cursor automatically jumps up a little bit.
It's like magic.
It is like magic. And if I switch over to key mode where we go between keyframes, it does the same thing. So now we jump to actual keyframes. So a very handy way to get around the animation inside of your scene. Really, that's about all I want to talk about the timeline itself. I do, however, want to mention this. If you look at my two keyframes right now, I have one here at 0 and one here at 100, you'll notice they're both red. Keyframes inside of 3ds Max are color-coded. Now, if you have a previous version of Max, the color coding system is different, and I'll mention that here in just a moment. Let me switch auto key back on, and once again, don't worry too much about what I'm doing here, because I'll be talking about auto key on its own here in just a moment. Let me come over here to frame 20, and let's just rotate this sphere a little bit. And as I move away, look at the color on this this keyframe. Now, you might not be able to see it so well after this video is compressed, but it should be okay. This is green. So I put a rotation keyframe down, and the keyframe is color-coded to be green. Finally, let me come over here to frame 69, and I'm going to scale my sphere down all the way till it's really tiny. And finally, you'll notice this key is actually colored blue. So
Very
we
cool.
red for position, blue for red for position, green for rotation, and then blue for scale. Now, in previous versions of 3ds Max, it was red for position, green for rotation, and then yellow for scale. It has been changed to the standard RGB format that most of the other tools in Max also follow. Now, quick note though, you'll notice I have a red key here at 100, I have a blue one here at 70, I have a green one at 20, but look back here at frame 0. I have a rainbow key. All that's doing is telling you that you have keyframe data on position, rotation, and scale all in this one frame.
Very cool.
So it's just an easy way to let you know you have multiple objects keyed all here at one time. So it's not like these would be stacked on...
Yeah, right.
They wouldn't be stacked on top of each other and you wouldn't know which one was actually keyed. Just a way to keep things nice and simple. Alright, so now that we know all of this great stuff about keyframes... Also, a quick thing I do want to mention, just because I'll forget if I don't. You know how that is.
Yeah, I do.
I can take keys, and as I mentioned earlier, I can drag them around, but also, just like objects in the viewport, I can hold down the Shift key, and I can clone these keys. So while you're not going to see much of a change in this specific animation, let's just say, like if I have a bounce, and I'll demonstrate this a little bit later, if I have a ball that's bouncing up and down, I can hold the sphere up in the air by taking the point where it's actually up in the air and cloning that key off, and I'll demonstrate that a little bit later, but I do want to go ahead and bring it up now. Alright, let's have a quick look at how we place keys onto this timeline. So, real quick, let me come through here and select and delete each one of these keys. I can just click on them and hit the delete key and they go away. In fact, now if I hit play,
nothing happened.
No animation whatsoever. So, two ways to actually animate in our scene. Let me go ahead and go full screen for this. The first method I'm going to discuss is set key. Now, you'll notice we have set key and auto key. These both have two entirely different workflows and behave very differently from one another, so we should kind of mention both of them. First of all, we have set key, which gives us a bright red frame around our viewport as soon as it's activated. And what set key is going to do is allow you to manually place keyframes on various parameters. So let's say if you only needed to key position, you could just set a key manually on position, or rotation, or scale. The idea, though, the main part of set key is that it is manual. It will not automatically place keys for you. That's what auto key is for, hence the name. But let's go ahead and just demonstrate how this works. Set key is going to be dependent on the key filters you have set. So if I click on this, we get our set key filters dialog, which by default will have position, rotation, and scale checked. So if I were to place a key right now, if you notice, I've got a little rainbow key here, which lets you know that all three, position, rotation, and scale, have been keyframed. But let's just say all I want to do is make this sphere move across the scene. Just simply start here, go to the end of the grid like so.
Then we just need to change the position.
Right, we wouldn't need rotation and scale. And if you don't need a specific thing animated, you don't want to key it.
That's right, it'll just bog down your system.
Exactly, it's just more information for Max to have to read, so there's no point in really doing it. So what I'm going to do is uncheck rotation and uncheck scale, so the only thing we'll be keying is position. And I'll place a key here at the beginning of the animation. This is where our object is going to start. Essentially, what I'm doing is recording its position at frame 0. So now let's come all the way to frame 100. I'll get my move tool out and move it to the other end of the grid, and now I'll record its new position at frame 100. Oh, wait a minute, look what happened. I tried to move my time slider and everything jumped back. Just a quick note, I wanted to bring that up. This is tremendously different from AutoKey in that if you move your object and fail to hit the Set Keys button, it's going to snap all the way back.
Right, because no keys were set.
Exactly. As far as Max is concerned, the animation hasn't changed yet. So what you need to do is move your time slider first, move your object, and then click Set Keys. Now you'll see a keyframe was indeed placed, and now as I move the time slider, I have animation. That can be frustrating to the first-time animator. If you don't get this pattern down, you will have a hard time animating in Set Key. Remember, it's select your object, key its location, move your time slider, adjust your object, and set the new key. So now I have an actual channel of animation, like so, and we can scrub back and forth and see the thing move about. That is how you use Set Key. It's fairly easy once you get the hang of it, and remember to keep changing your filters. So like maybe if we're only changing a value inside of a modifier, we just need to have modifiers checked and not position or rotation scale or any of these other objects. So when you're using Set Key, you will be in this dialog a lot. In fact, when I'm using Set Key, I have this dialog up all the time. Now, just as a matter of personal preference, I don't use Set Key that much. If the situation calls for it, if I know I just need one specific thing animated and I don't want to deal with AutoKey because I might mess something up,
right,
then I will use Set Key. But
AutoKey is so much more convenient.
AutoKey is a lot easier. To demonstrate AutoKey, let me come in here and delete out my other two keyframes, and we'll see our object snap back to its original location when I do that. And now if I activate AutoKey, watch the border here around the viewport. You'll notice it turns a dark red. So as long as you're not colorblind, you're going to be able to tell the difference immediately between AutoKey and Set Key. Now just a real quick thing about AutoKey. It's very easy to use, but it opens the door to catastrophe if you're not very careful. For instance, what I can do with AutoKey is just, right now you'll notice I have no keyframes. My object is sitting right here at frame 0. I can slide to frame 100 and just move my object.
And 2 keyframes were set.
2 keyframes are automatically dropped into place. A keyframe at 0 for where the object began, and a new keyframe at 100 for where it ends. And now I can scrub right in between these. And I know there are some of you out there who are thinking, but Zach, that is so much faster and easier. Why don't we use AutoKey for everything? Well, you can if you want to, but you have to be careful.
That's right. If you accidentally have AutoKey on, you move your object around, suddenly you'll be setting keyframes.
Oh, but it's so much more than that. It's even if more things than just moving your object. Let's say, just for example, I have left AutoKey on, I am lazy, and I forgot to switch it off. I can come in here under my modifier stack and be like, you know, actually, I wanted the radius of this guy to be something a little less than 16. Maybe we wanted it to be something like 6. Look really closely at the radius spinner now. It's got a little red bracket around it. This is letting you know that it has been animated. So now as I drag back through, my radius shrinks down. Also, I have a yellow keyframe here to let me know that I have just keyframed a parameter, or I'm sorry, an area over here inside of the modifier list. So just be aware of that. But so now, with AutoKey being on by accident, I have just animated something that I did not want animated. So at least be aware of that. Don't be afraid to use AutoKey. It's a great system for moving objects around. I absolutely love it. But
just let the red remind you that you're in AutoKey.
Exactly. Anytime you see red, remember that you should be animating right now. If what you're doing has nothing to do with animation, you need to switch this guy off. So there's your difference between AutoKey and Set Key. Now just another quick thing. What if you needed to set keyframes that were kind of already on your timeline? Like, let's say I need a keyframe at frame 50, and I'm using AutoKey. You know, how do I go about setting that? Well, there's a couple of ways. Believe it or not, when you're in AutoKey, you can still come in here and use your Set Keys button. So let me go ahead and activate position under my filters. I can still set a key with this button in AutoKey, just fine. Max doesn't care. It says fine. You go ahead and do that if that's what you want to do. But there's another way as well if you don't want to do this. You can just move to the specific frame where you need the key placed, right-click on the time slider, and then just tell it what you want to actually key for position, rotation, or scale. It'll tell you your source time, destination time, and so on, and click OK. Now, the source time and destination time were both the same right there, which is probably making one or two of you think, but why would you do that? Well, let me go ahead and demonstrate. Let's say, just for an example, that I wanted our ball to hold its position right here until frame 50 and then move. There's two ways I can do it. One, I can select this keyframe here at the beginning of the animation, hold down the Shift key, and drag it here to frame 50. Now watch this. Hold its position till frame 50, and then shoots forward. Why is it doing that? It's because this keyframe has now been cloned. The data that I recorded, which tells the ball what position to be in, it tells the ball to be here at this edge of the sphere, has been cloned and brought over here as well. So, right here, we've told the ball, I want you to be at this end of the grid, over here. This keyframe tells it the same thing. So what the ball is going to do is stay on that end of the grid until it gets past frame 50, then the computer will begin interpolating between the next two keys. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
That's one way to do this. The other way is to move back to frame 0 and right mouse drag the time slider to frame 50. Now look at this. Source time is 0, destination time is 50. Now if we click OK, boom, we get the exact same thing.
Very nice.
So just two different ways to pull that off should you ever need to clone keys. And actually that's a bit of a better example for earlier when I was trying to show you why you would clone keys. There's several different reasons to do it, but just thought I'd bring that up. So that shows the different ways that we can place keys. There is one more thing I want to talk about, and that's it's actually, I wasn't going to bring it up originally. I didn't mention it. It's just one of those extra things. It's like I get involved. I'll start teaching and be like, man, there's so much other cool stuff I could be teaching. So I'm going to talk for just a second about trajectories. What are trajectories? Well, to demonstrate them, let me go ahead and change my animation just a bit. Let's come over here to, say, frame 33. I'm going to right-click and just place a keyframe. And we'll come to frame 66, right-click and place a keyframe. And now what I've done is I've created 4 keyframes that are just moving our ball back and forth. But check this out. Now I can come here to about frame 17. I've still got auto key on, by the way. Keep that in mind. I can move the ball up in Z. Now watch what happens. As I come back to frame 33, the ball drops back down. It's because frame 33, I've already told the ball to be right on the grid. So this is acting kind of like an anchor point. So I can come back here to, let's say, about frame 51, move the ball back up into the air, and it shoots back down here at 66 because that's where I told it to be at 66. So what have I done? I'm starting to make this ball bounce up and down. In a really general idea, I know I probably got 1 or 2 pro animators out there who are like, that's a really crappy looking jump. But that's okay. We're going to refine it a little bit later. Right now I'm just making a quick demonstration. So now we'll pull this up into the air as well. Let's go ahead and kind of move our scene around a little bit. And now as I scrub back through, you can see our ball's kind of wavering up and down. It's not really a bounce. It's just kind of going up and down.
It looks more like a sine wave.
Yeah, absolutely. So now I can come under my Display tab in my command panel. At the very bottom, I have Display Properties. I can activate Trajectory.
Ah, very nice.
Now, what is a trajectory? A trajectory is essentially an interpolated motion path that Max comes up with by combining all 3 of your position animation curves. Now, we haven't talked about animation curves yet, so don't get too scared. Essentially, it's like a 3D representation of your keyframes. That's the easiest way to put it. And if we scrub through this, you will notice that the ball, or the ball's pivot, I should say, is following this trajectory exactly.
It's basically just the path that the ball moves on.
Absolutely. But it gets better. This is kind of the... I mentioned there are 2 ways to place keyframes. You could argue there's kind of 2.5. Because this is another way that we can add keys into our scene and adjust how they behave. Let me come back 1 tab into my motion panel, and I notice I have parameters and trajectories. Let me go ahead and click on the trajectories button, and there's a couple of things I can do here. One, I can already see my trajectory because I switched it on already, but if I click on the sub-object button, not subject, kind of shortened it a little much. If I click on the sub-object button, I now have access to all of the keys on this trajectory. So I can click on one, and I can move it, and look at the trajectory actually change.
Very cool.
So now, the ball changes as well. I can actually change the value of these keys just by moving them around on the trajectory. Also, I can delete them out if I don't want them anymore. And you'll notice it disappeared down here on the timeline as well.
Oh, very nice.
If I need to add keys in, there's a button for that. There's add key. Also, there's delete key. You can use that. I just deleted that last key by hand. I just thought I mentioned that up. Let me kind of undo that. There's two ways to do it. You can select the thing and just hit the delete key, which is what I did a second ago, but I'll stick to the book and make sure, well, there's no book, but I'll go ahead and just make sure you know that you can hit the delete key button, and that will get rid of them. But I can add keys back in, click this down, and you'll notice this becomes highlighted, and then I just click anywhere on the trajectory. You'll notice as soon as I mouse over the trajectory, my cursor turns into a crosshair. So let's get about halfway through, and we'll click, and we do get that keyframe right back. So let me switch off add key mode. I can now select this key, bring it up into the air, and we're right back to where we started. So I just wanted to go ahead and bring that up. You can go ahead and go into your motion panel, access trajectories, open up the sub-object to get to the actual keyframes themselves, and move these around. Isn't that creepy?
That is creepy.
And like, watch this animation. So you can move these around to adjust how your animation is playing after you've already placed all your keys. It's a great way to really see where your object's going to go. Like, for example, let's say you moved let's say you got like a little character, or even a ball. A ball can be a character under the right circumstances. Let's say we've got it kind of going through some columns or moving around other objects. We can switch on trajectory and see exactly where it's going. So maybe at one point, if the ball accidentally like passes through a column, like just clips it a little bit, we can take the keyframe right there, pull it away from the column right there in our viewport, and fix it right there, without having to go through and deal with keyframe settings and won't have to worry about
just
values.
Looking at values.
Exactly. So it's just a little bit of an easier way to work. Really, though, with that, that's about all I want to talk about. Just basic animation, just kind of introducing you to the idea of animation. Now, in the next lesson, we're going to start talking about the curve editor and how we can refine animation. But we'll get to that here in just a few minutes. I guess that about wraps it up. So that's it for lesson 1. Thanks a lot, everybody.